when Adora spotted her favorite place in the city, the cracked stone fountain in front of the public library. But today she wasn't alone. A little girl in a pale yellow dress sat cross-legged on the ledge, holding a schoolbook upside down. Across the street, a black SUV idled, its tinted window rolled down, and a pair of eyes watched them both closely. Adora Nwosu spotted her favorite place in the city, the cracked stone fountain in front of the public library. The fountain hadn't worked in years, but its broad, cool ledge made a perfect seat. It was where she could read in peace without being noticed. Today, though, the fountain wasn't empty. A small girl, no older than 7, sat cross-legged on the stone, holding a schoolbook upside down and frowning hard at the page. She was wearing a pale yellow dress with a tear along the hem, and her backpack was twice her size. Adora tilted her head. "Your book's upside down," she said softly. The girl looked up, startled. "Oh." She quickly flipped it, cheeks pink. Adora smiled and sat beside her. "Math problems?" "Yes, but they're hard," the girl admitted. In a different life, Adora might have been rushing off to a lecture hall with coffee in hand. But that life had been left behind months ago. Now she had nothing but her wits, a few tattered clothes, and the habit of helping people who reminded her of herself. "Let's go through it together," Adora said. "What's your name?" "Amara," the girl replied, eyes brightening. Neither of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street. Its tinted window rolled down just enough for Chief Emeka Okiri, one of the city's most influential businessmen, to watch them intently. Chief Emeka Okiri had been in too many boardrooms to count. Deals worth millions had passed through his hands, and his schedule was usually packed with high-stakes meetings. But that morning, on his way to the office, something had made him slow his driver down. It wasn't the broken fountain. It wasn't even the library. It was the sight of his daughter, Amara, chatting easily with a young woman in faded jeans and a frayed sweater. Emeka's brow furrowed. He had told the nanny to take Amara directly to her private tutor. Why was she here? And who was this stranger? "Sir," the driver asked, "should we go closer?" "No," Emeka said, keeping his voice calm. "Just watch." From the SUV, he could see Adora leaning over the book, her lips moving as she explained something. Amara laughed, nodded, and began scribbling with more confidence. It was unusual. Amara was shy around new people. She barely spoke in her own classroom, yet here she was, smiling like she'd known this woman forever. A flicker of curiosity crossed Emeka's mind. Something about the stranger's body language, patient, encouraging, like a teacher who loved the job, made him want to know more. But he was also a father. He couldn't just let anyone get close to his child. "Pull over," he said at last. The SUV crept forward. As the engine noise grew louder, Adora finally glanced up and locked eyes with the man behind the tinted glass. The SUV stopped a few feet away from the fountain. The door opened and a tall man stepped out, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive navy suit, and with an expression so unreadable it made Adora sit up straighter. "Daddy!" Amara's voice lit up as she ran toward him. He bent slightly, hugging her but keeping his eyes fixed on Adora. "This is my friend," Amara said quickly, looking between them. "She's helping me with maths." Friend. The word lodged somewhere in Emeka's mind. His daughter didn't call many people that. He stepped closer. "And you are?" "Adora," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Do you work here at the library?" he asked. "No," she said simply. "I just come here sometimes." Emeka studied her. The faint wear on her shoes, the small backpack at her feet, the way her sweater sleeves were slightly too long. Details that whispered of someone who didn't have much, but carried herself with quiet dignity. "How do you know my daughter?" he pressed. "She didn't know how to solve a problem," Adora answered. "I helped her. That's all." A pause stretched between them. Amara shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Emeka nodded once. "Thank you." His tone was polite, but his eyes said he was far from done with this conversation. He took Amara's hand and turned toward the SUV. But just before stepping inside, he glanced over his shoulder at Adora. Her expression was unreadable, calm, almost detached, as if she'd already accepted that whatever kindness had passed between them at the fountain was now over. The door shut. The SUV rolled away. Inside, Amara spoke before her father could. "She's nice, Daddy. She didn't laugh when I got the answers wrong." Emeka gave a short nod but said nothing. He was thinking. In his world, chance encounters were rarely just that. People always had motives, hidden angles. But there was something about this girl, Adora, her lack of effort to impress him, her quiet confidence, even in worn clothes. It unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Back at the fountain, Adora watched the car disappear. She didn't expect to see either of them again. The city had a way of swallowing moments like these, brief intersections of lives, gone before they had a chance to matter. Still, as she gathered her things and headed toward the shelter, where she sometimes spent the night, she caught herself smiling. Amara had understood the problem perfectly by the end. She didn't know that this small act had already set something in motion, something that would pull her and the man in the SUV back into each other's worlds sooner than either expected. That evening, Emeka sat in his study, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling beside stacks of unopened documents. Instead of preparing for his morning meeting, he found himself replaying the scene at the fountain. The way Adora had spoken, clear, unhurried. The way Amara had leaned in, listening intently. It was rare for his daughter to connect with anyone so quickly, let alone a stranger. He leaned back in his leather chair and called for his assistant. "Obi," he said when the man appeared in the doorway, "I need you to find out who a young woman named Adora Nwosu is. She's in her 20s, slim build, natural hair. I saw her at the old library fountain this morning." Obi raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. "Yes, sir." By the next afternoon, Obi returned with a thin folder. Emeka's fingers tapped against the desk as he read. Adora Nwosu, 24 years old. Once a university student, studying education. Dropped out last year. No fixed address. Volunteers occasionally at the community center. No criminal record. There was also a single photo, taken from her volunteer ID. She was smiling faintly, but her eyes looked tired. Emeka closed the folder slowly. This was no scammer or con artist. But it still didn't explain why she was sitting at the fountain that morning, teaching his daughter with such patience. For the first time in a long while, Chief Emeka felt unsettled. Not because Adora was a mystery, but because he wasn't sure he wanted to keep her that way. 3 days later, Adora was standing in the narrow aisle of the community center's small library, returning worn-out textbooks to the shelves. It wasn't a paid job, just something she did in exchange for warm meals and a quiet place to sit for a few hours. She didn't notice the footsteps at first. The library was usually empty at this hour, except for the occasional child doing homework. But when she heard the door open, she instinctively looked up and froze. Chief Emeka stood in the doorway. His suit was darker this time, his expression unreadable as ever. But this time, he wasn't alone. Amara was by his side, holding a school bag and wearing that same pale yellow dress. "Daddy said I could see you again," Amara announced brightly, skipping over to Adora. Adora's eyes shifted to Emeka, searching for his reason. "Why?" she asked simply. "I need someone to help my daughter after school," Emeka said. Her tutor resigned. Adora blinked. "And you came here?" "I came to find you," he replied, his tone even, almost matter-of-fact. The library felt smaller now, the air tighter. Adora didn't know whether to be flattered, suspicious, or concerned. She had learned the hard way that when powerful men sought you out, it was rarely without strings attached. Still, Amara's hopeful eyes were impossible to ignore. "Think about it," Emeka said, as though he already knew she would. That night, Adora lay on the narrow cot in the women's shelter, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the ceiling fan was broken, so the air hung heavy and warm, making her thoughts feel just as thick. A job. That's what he'd offered her. But it wasn't just any job. It was stepping into the world of a man who clearly lived far above hers. She turned on her side. She could still see Amara's hopeful face in her mind, the way the little girl had clung to her arm as if she were already her teacher. It made Adora's chest ache. but memories crept in two sharper ones. The landlord's threats when she couldn't pay rent. The day she had to leave university because there was no money left. The sideways glances from people who thought they knew her story. She had worked too hard to keep her dignity intact. What if this job wasn't as simple as tutoring? The shelter's night guard coughed somewhere down the hall, breaking her spiral of thoughts. Adora exhaled slowly. She had to make a choice, and soon. By morning, she decided. If she took the job, it would be for one reason only, Amara. The following afternoon, a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of the shelter. Adora hesitated before stepping inside. The leather seats felt too soft, too clean, as if she might leave a mark just by sitting. The driver didn't speak during the ride. Through the tinted window, she watched the streets change, from noisy, crowded markets to wide, quiet roads lined with manicured trees. When they stopped, her breath caught. A set of wrought iron gates swung open to reveal a sprawling white mansion. The walls gleamed under the sun, and the garden looked like something out of a magazine. Trimmed hedges, fountains that actually worked, and a driveway big enough for a football field. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with jasmine. Marble floors reflected the chandelier light, and every piece of furniture looked as though it cost more than her entire education. Emeka appeared at the top of the staircase, his steps unhurried. "You're here," he said simply. Amara came running down, her excitement breaking the stiffness in the room. "Come, I'll show you my study room." Adora followed her up the stairs, but not before feeling the weight of Emeka's eyes on her. She wasn't sure if it was scrutiny, or something else entirely. For the next hour, she guided Amara through her homework. The little girl listened intently, just as she had at the fountain. When they finished, Emeka's voice came from the doorway. "She's smiling again," he said quietly, almost to himself. Adora turned, unsure how to respond. The following week, Adora settled into a rhythm, arriving each afternoon, working with Amara, then quietly slipping away before the evening crowd of guests and associates filled the house. But Emeka wasn't the type to let someone orbit his life without understanding who they were. One day after a lesson, he lingered in the study as Amara ran off to get her art supplies. "You went to the university," he said casually, as if reading it from a weather report. Adora nodded. "I did. Why did you leave?" She hesitated. Circumstances changed. He studied her face, searching for cracks in her composure. "And now? I work where I can." Her voice was even, but her fingers tightened slightly around the book in her hand. Emeka leaned back against the desk. "You know, most people in your situation would have asked me for help by now." Adora's gaze flickered to his, sharp. "I'm not most people." For the first time since they'd met, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "No, you're not." Amara's return broke the moment, her laughter filling the air. But Adora could feel it, the unspoken understanding that they were both assessing each other, deciding how far this fragile trust could go. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Adora had just finished a math lesson with Amara when the little girl's shoulders slumped. "My head hurts," she murmured. Adora knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her forehead. "Warm. Too warm. Let's get you some water," she said gently. But halfway to the kitchen, Amara swayed and stumbled. Adora caught her just in time, her heart racing. Within minutes, the household was in motion, the cook calling for ice, a maid rushing to find medicine. Emeka appeared in the doorway, his eyes snapping to the sight of Adora cradling his daughter. "She's burning up," Adora said quickly. "She needs a doctor." Without a word, Emeka took Amara from her arms, but Adora followed without hesitation, refusing to be dismissed. In the car, she sat beside the little girl, holding her hand all the way to the hospital. Hours later, after the doctor confirmed it was a sudden viral fever and Amara was resting comfortably, Emeka stepped into the hallway where Adora sat. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she replied, meeting his gaze. "She's my student. That means something to me." For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, not as the girl from the fountain or the outsider in his home, but as someone who had stepped into his family's life without fear. The day after the hospital scare, Amara was back home, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a cup of warm cocoa. Adora sat beside her, reading aloud from a storybook. When Emeka walked in, the first thing he noticed wasn't his daughter's flushed cheeks. It was the way she was leaning against Adora, relaxed and content. "She insisted you come today," he said after Amara dozed off. "I couldn't say no," Adora replied. Emeka nodded, almost to himself. She hasn't been this open with anyone since her mother passed. The words hung in the air. Adora glanced at him, catching a flicker of something in his eyes, grief, softened by time but still there. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He gave a small, appreciative nod. "You've done more for her in a few weeks than some people have in years." Adora felt heat rise to her cheeks. Compliments from him were rare, and somehow carried more weight than she expected. But they also made her uneasy, because the closer she grew to Amara, the harder it would be to leave, and in her world, nothing stable ever lasted for long. Still, as she looked down at the sleeping child, she couldn't deny it. She was already in too deep. The first time Adora met Ani Chinyere, it wasn't exactly a warm introduction. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, a tall woman in a flowing Ankara dress, her perfume sharp enough to fill the entire hallway. She greeted Emeka with a kiss on the cheek before her eyes swept the room and landed on Adora. "And who is this?" Chinyere asked, her voice sugary but edged. "She's Amara's tutor," Emeka replied. Chinyere's smile didn't reach her eyes. "A tutor? From where?" "Here," Adora answered evenly. The older woman's gaze flicked over her, from the worn straps of her handbag to the scuffed flats on her feet. I see." Throughout the visit, Chinyere's eyes followed her, each glance a silent question. "What are you doing here?" When Adora excused herself to the kitchen, she didn't expect Chinyere to follow. "Let me give you some advice," the woman said in a low voice. "Men like Emeka, their world is not for girls like you. Don't get too comfortable." Adora met her gaze without flinching. "I'm here for Amara. That's all." Chinyere smiled faintly, as if she didn't believe a word. "We'll see." That night, Adora lay awake on her cot at the shelter, Chinyere's words replaying in her mind. "Men like Emeka, their world is not for girls like you." She told herself it didn't matter. She had survived harsher judgments before. But the truth was, Chinyere had touched a nerve. Adora knew how quickly the rich could discard people like her, no matter how close they seemed. By morning, she'd made a decision. She would finish the week's lessons, then tell Emeka she couldn't continue. But when she arrived that afternoon, Amara was waiting by the front gate, clutching a folded piece of paper. "I made you something," the little girl said, handing it over. It was a drawing, the three of them, Amara in the middle, Adora on one side, Emeka on the other. Underneath, in crooked handwriting, it read, "My family." Adora's throat tightened. "You can't leave, right?" Amara asked, her voice small. "Because then my family will be broken again." The words landed heavier than any warning Chinyere had given. In that moment, Adora knew. Walking away wasn't as simple as she thought. 2 days later, Adora finished Amara's lesson and began packing her bag. She had rehearsed a polite goodbye in her head all morning, a way to leave without making it harder for either of them. But before she could speak, Emeka appeared in the doorway. "Walk with me," he said. They stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the garden. The evening light painted the hedges gold, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I know what Chinyere said to you," Emeka began, his voice low. "She means well, but she's wrong." Adora looked away. Her warning wasn't anything I haven't heard before. "Maybe so," he said, "but I don't bring people into my daughter's life lightly. You've been here for a short time, and yet she laughs more. She tries harder. She sleeps better. That's not something I ignore." Adora's grip on her bag tightened. "And when you decide I'm no longer useful?" His gaze didn't waver. "I don't plan on making that decision. Unless you want me to." The silence stretched, but it was different now, not heavy, not tense. From inside, Amara's voice called out, Dinner's ready. Emeka gave a small smile. Stay. Eat with us. Adora hesitated only a second before nodding. All right. As they walked back inside, the sound of Amara's laughter filled the room. For the first time in a long while, Adora felt something she hadn't dared to hope for, a sense of belonging. And this time, she wasn't going to run from it.